Good morning. I'll call on the Honourable Minister responsible for education to grace us with prayers this morning.
Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honour, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all of the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, official members and ministers of Cabinet, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace, now and always. Amen.
Please be seated. By way of announcements from the Madam Clerk, go ahead.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker, messages and announcements.
By way of announcements from the Chair, the AGM for CPA was held yesterday afternoon, and it was decided by unanimous support for the membership during the past 2 years to continue for the next 2 years.
Presentation of papers and of report. Financial Reporting Authority, Cayman, Portfolio of Legal Affairs, Annual Report 2013-2014. To be laid on the table by the Honourable Attorney General, ex officio member responsible for the Portfolio of Legal Affairs.
Before I call on the Honourable Attorney General, out of the abundance of caution, let me just say that there was a quorum yesterday. The quorum was 7 and 7 were present. I need not say no more on that. Honourable Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I seek the leave of the House to lay on the table the Financial Reporting Authority annual report for the period 2013-2014.
So ordered. Would the Honourable Attorney General wish to speak to his report?
Madam Speaker, just to say that the report itself is quite comprehensive and is basically largely self-explanatory. And I would just, with your leave, just read the first paragraph from the message from the director, which sort of summarizes the activities. When he says, Madam Speaker, and I quote, says this year, 2013-2014, marks the 11th reporting period for the FRA. The year has seen a significant increase in the number of suspicious activity reports when compared to the previous year. There were 558 cases reported, and admittedly, such large numbers posed an uphill challenge to the analytical staff. However, it is nonetheless gratifying to note that the vigilance of the reporting entities has not waned, and this creates a hostile environment for those who are desirous of using our jurisdictions for the criminal activities and enrichment. And so, Madam Speaker, with those wise observations from the Director, I commend the report to this Honorable House and members of the public at large. Thank you.
Thank you.
Government of the Cayman Islands Portfolio of Legal Affairs Annual Financial Statements for the year ended 30th of June 2012.
I once again recognize the Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, with the leave of this House, I beg to lay on the table the annual report financial statements for the Portfolio of Legal Affairs for the period ending 30th of June 2012.
So ordered. Does the Honorable Member wish to speak to it?
Thank you. Madam Speaker, just to say that I think the honorable members will note that it says period 2012. The truth is that the report itself was done on time and was approved by Cabinet. But of course, there was a bit of oversight and somehow it fell through the cracks. And so just being brought to the House. And so my apologies on behalf of the staff of the portfolio, Madam Speaker, for the late laying of this report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Government of the Cayman Islands Judicial Administration Financial Statements for 30th of June 2014 to be laid on the table by the Honorable Attorney General.
Honorable Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I seek the leave of the House to lay on the table of this House the annual report and financial statement for the judicial administration for the period ending 30th of June 2014.
So ordered. Does the Honorable Member wish to speak to it?
No, Madam Speaker, the report itself is quite self-explanatory. Thank you.
Thank you.
(2013-2014) Annual Report of the Civil Aviation Authority of the Cayman Islands to be laid on the table by the Honorable Deputy Governor.
I recognize the Honorable Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning.
Morning.
I beg to lay on the table of this Honorable House the annual report of the Civil Aviation Authority of the Cayman Islands as at the 30th of June, 2014.
So ordered. Does the Honorable Deputy Governor wish to speak to your report?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just briefly, I will offer a brief explanation on the components of the annual report and then speak briefly to the specifics of the financial statements as of June 2014. Madam Speaker, the 13-14 financial year was another successful year for the authority that culminated in the highest net income ever realized at the authority. This result is testament to the prudent management of the authority's finances and the commitment and dedication of its employees. While there are many factors beyond the control of the authority that could influence its financial performance, management has been diligent in its approach. Management has been diligent in its approach to ensure that efficiencies and service levels are optimized through training, IT implementation, and upgrades. Also, adherence to sound regulatory standards and appropriate staff recognition and incentives. The audited financial statements just tabled consist of the statement of financial position, the statement of comprehensive income, the statement of cash flows, the statement of changes in equity, and the notes to the financial statement. The CAACI equity for the fiscal year ended 30th June 2014 indicate that net assets of the organization have increased by CI 269,000 or 6%. The net worth of the CAACI stood at 4.89 million as of 30th June 2014. Operating activity during the year ended 30th June 2014, Madam Speaker, in terms of operating activity of the CAACI during the fiscal year ended 30 June 2014, the following summary is provided. The CAACI produced total revenues of CI 6.92 million, incurred total expenses of CI 3.89 million, generating an operating surplus in the amount of CI 3.0 million before its remeasurement of the post-employment benefit obligation, which resulted in a total comprehensive income for the year of CI 2.8 million. Madam Speaker, in relation to the Auditor General's opinion, the Auditor General has issued a qualified opinion on the financial position of the CAACI. The sole qualification relates to certain elements of the actuarial valuation of the defined benefit obligation, which is in dispute. Save for that sole qualification, Madam Speaker, the Auditor General has stated that the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the Civil Aviation Authority of the Cayman Islands as of 30th of June 2014. Thank you.
Cayman Islands Human Rights Commission Annual Report 2014 to be laid on the table by the Honourable Deputy Governor.
I recognize the Honourable Deputy Governor, and I just wish to ask whether or not this report has gone out public.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I was informed by the chair of the authority that because of the delays they felt in the report being tabled, which was out of our control, that they had gone ahead and released it. We've subsequently spoken to them about that.
Much appreciated. Saves me from having to make a statement thereon.
Yes, ma'am. That shouldn't happen again. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the fifth report of the Human Rights Commission, which covers the period 1st of January 2014 to the 31st of December 2014, in line with its constitutional mandate in Section 1168 of the Cayman Island Constitution Order 2009.
So ordered. Would the Honourable Deputy Governor, I'm given a new portfolio today, sorry, wish to speak on this report?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. A brief overview of the fifth annual report. The 2014 reporting year saw the Commission focus on issues such as the protection of privacy, preservations of private and family life, and a reinforcement of the absolute stance against inhuman and degrading treatment. The Commission also worked diligently to continue to review local draft legislation as well as various policies and procedures of the Cayman Islands government to ensure compliance with the Bill of Rights. During the reporting year, the HRC received 18 complaints from members of the public alleging breaches by public officials of their human rights. The Commission reviewed and closed 15 of those complaints and continues to work toward resolving the remaining complaints through liaison with the relevant public authorities. During this reporting period, 4 new members were appointed to the Human Rights Commission. Those include James Austin Smith, Chelsea Fraser Rivers, Lisa Hurlston McKenzie, and Reverend Donovan Myers, bringing various elements of expertise from many sectors of the community, which work together to enhance the effectiveness of the HRC. In addition, I would like to thank the outgoing chairman, Mr. Alistair Walters, for having served on the commission for the past 5 years. I encourage members of the House and the public to familiarize themselves with the contents of the report, which is available online at the Human Rights Commission's website. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
Cayman Islands Monetary Authority Annual Report 2014 to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Financial Services, Commerce and Environment.
Recognize Honourable Minister responsible for financial services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the annual report of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority for the year ended 30th June 2014.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Minister wish to speak to his report?
Yes, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, the annual report tabled for the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority is comprised of three sections: an industry overview, organizational developments, and the authority's audited financial statements as at 30th June 2014. In terms of financial performance, Madam Speaker, dealing with that first, the authority's net income for the 2013-14 financial year was 0.684 million, which was allocated to CEMA's capital expenditures, reserves, and general reserves. Total assets as at 30th June 2014 were CI 118 million, 228,000, which was up from the 2013 figure of 111 million, 604,000. This amount includes currency reserves of CI 102 million, 624,000. Total liabilities at 30th June 2014 equaled 94,956,000, which was an increase from 89,016,000 in 2013. Total reserves were CI 20,944,000, an increase from the 2013 figure of 20,260,000. Contributed capital, Madam Speaker, remained the same at 2,328,000. Madam Speaker, the authority collected $106,832,000 in fees from regulated entities on behalf of the Cayman Islands government for the 2013-14 financial year. And this reflected an increase from $101,659,000 for the prior year and represented new revenue measures which had been implemented by the government in 2012-13. The currency in circulation, Madam Speaker, as at 30th June 2014 was 91,720,000, and this represents a 5.2% increase over the previous year of which was 87,200,000. The currency reserves exceeded currency in circulation by approximately 10.9 million. The Auditor General, Madam Speaker, has issued an unqualified opinion in respect of the financial position of the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority as at 30th June 2014. Madam Speaker, in terms of the industry overview, efforts continued during the year 2013-14 to strengthen and enhance the regulatory framework governing financial services and the industry in the Cayman Islands. Regulatory policies for licensing banks and money services businesses were revised, and a directors' registration and licensing law was enacted, as members will know. The authority had initially anticipated collections from the Directors' Registration licensing law to be CI $11 million per calendar year. Now, at the completion of the audit, this figure was revised downwards to $9 million. The initial payment dates under the Directors' Registration licensing law were the 3rd of September 2014 and the 3rd of December 2014. Based on the annual collections for the 2014 calendar year, the authority currently estimates that this figure may have to be further revised from 9 million to 7 million. Madam Speaker, in relation to captive insurance companies, the Cayman Islands remain the second largest domicile, and the jurisdiction is number 1 for the domicile for healthcare captives. 28 new entities were added during the fiscal year, and the number of insurance companies in total stood at 764 as at 30th June 2014, with premiums equaling 12.3 billion and total assets equaling 54.9 billion. In relation to funds, Madam Speaker, despite the decline in new fund authorization since the credit crisis in 2008, the funds industry remains healthy, with 11,296 total funds registered as at 30th June 2014, compared to 11,209 as at 30th June 2013. The total funds as at June 2014 includes 2,676 master funds that are registered as a direct result of the Mutual Funds Amendment Law 2012. In relation to trust and corporate and company management services, Madam Speaker, the Cayman Islands remains a leading jurisdiction from which trust and company management services are provided. There were 132 licensed trust companies as at 30th June 2014. In respect of restricted trust licensees, trust companies, there were 65. Nominee trust licensees were 56, and controlled subsidiaries were 43. There were a total of 91 private trust companies as at June 2014, with 13 in total being registered during that fiscal year. In relation to banks, Madam Speaker, the total banking sector assets as at June 2014 stood at 1.399 trillion and liabilities at 1.441 trillion. Domestic assets were 34 billion and liabilities were 60 billion. As at June 2014, the jurisdiction ranked 6th internationally in terms of external cross-border assets, with that number being 1.365 trillion, and 5th by external cross-border liabilities, with that number being at 1.347 trillion, booked from the Cayman Islands. Madam Speaker, I've attempted to provide a very short summary of the authority's annual report and highlight several key points. I would like to emphasize the critical role that the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority plays in our financial services industry, and thereby the significant impact that it has on our economy. We remain confident in the strength of the authority and its ability to operate successfully in a dynamic and competitive global environment in which the financial services industry operates. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
Auditors Oversight Authority Annual Report for the year ended 30th of June 2014, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Financial Services, Commerce and Environment.
Honourable Minister for Financial Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the annual report of the Auditors Oversight Authority for the year ended 30th June 2014.
So ordered. Would the Honourable Minister wish to speak to this report?
Madam Speaker, I think the report is fairly self-explanatory. I would commend it to members to read. And with that, I would would add nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cayman Islands Airport Authority financial statements year ended 30th of June 2012 to be laid on the table by the Honorable Minister of District Administration, Tourism and Transport.
Recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this honorable House Cayman Islands Airport Authority financial statement, year ended 30th of June 2012.
So ordered. The Honourable Minister wish to speak to the report.
Just to say, Madam Speaker, I invite all honorable members and the public to review the report in detail.
Thank you.
Sister Island Affordable Housing Development Corporation annual financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2011, for the year ended 30th of June 2012, for the year ended 30th of June 2013, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of District Administration, Tourism and Transport.
I recognize Honourable Minister responsible for District Administration.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this honorable House the Sister Islands Affordable Housing Development Corporation annual financial statements for the years ending 30th of June 2011, 30th of June 2012, 30th of June 2013.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Member wish to speak to it?
Madam Speaker, just to invite all honorable members to read at their convenience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cayman Airways Limited financial statements 30th of June 2013, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of District Administration, Tourism and Transport.
I recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for Tourism and Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this honorable House Cayman Airways Limited financial statement 30th of June 2013.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Minister wish to speak to it?
Again, Madam Speaker, just to invite all honorable members to have a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ministry of Finance, Tourism and Development, Financial Services, annual financial statements for year ended 30th of June 2013, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of District Administration, Tourism and Transport.
I recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for District Administration, Tourism and Transport.
Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this honorable House the Ministry, Finance, Tourism and Development annual financial statement for the year ending 30th of June 2013.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Minister wish to speak to it?
Just to invite all honorable members and the public to review the report in detail.
Thank you.
Report and recommendations of Minister responsible for lands on the vesting of Crown Land Block 15B, Parcel 136, to the Home Gas Limited, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure.
I recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for lands.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this honourable House the report and recommendation of the disposition of Crown property that has been prepared in accordance with the requirements of the Governor Vesting of Lands Law 2005 revision.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Minister for Lands wish to speak to his report?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just to inform all members of the process which allowed us to get this far. Madam Speaker, the details of this land matter have been published in the Cayman Islands Gazette, issue number 22 of 2014, dated November 3rd, 2014, and a local newspaper, namely the Cayman Reporter, on 30th of October 2014. Also, as the law requires, 3 valuations have been carried out on the subject property. Each valuation report forms part of the overall report which has been tabled, and each of these also provides a general indication of the value of the property that the government now proposes to dispose of, that is, to sell. The report deals with the sale of Block 15B, Parcel 376, to Home Gas Limited. This parcel, Madam Speaker, is located along the west side of Walker's Road, close to its junction with Moxham Road. The approximate area of the parcel is 0.25 of an acre. The parcel has a very narrow, rectangular shape with frontage onto Walker's Road. The dimensions of the parcel are 35 feet in width by 300 feet in length. The parcel previously was part of the eastern end of what we know as 0.4 Street. At that time, 0.4 Street actually connected South Church Street and Walker's Road via the Grand Palm link. However, on the recommendation of the Highway Authority, a part of 0.4 Street was declared legally closed and vested to the Crown as Block 15B, Parcel 36, by the Governor in Cabinet on the 28th day of January 2002, under Section 14 of the Roads Law. Subsequent to that, Madam Speaker, since 2002, Home Gas Limited, as the adjoining landowner, often inquired upon the possibility of purchasing this land from the government for operational reasons. Cabinet advised the governor that the land was non-operational and recommended it be offered for sale. So the subject parcel was offered for sale by public tender in July of 2014. The sole bid received from the public tender process was from Home Gas Limited, which I think is fairly obvious because 35 feet in width by 300 really is not any size for a standalone parcel to be able to be used. The reserve price was $103,000. That's CI dollars, plus costs. The price represents the highest of the 3 valuations received, being market value, taking into account the additional value to a special purchaser, that is Home Gas Limited, being the adjoining owner. A report on this tender exercise was considered by Cabinet on the 23rd of September of 2014, and after careful analysis and consideration, Cabinet resolved to advise the Governor that the land should be sold to Home Gas for CI $103,000 plus costs. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I hope that informs all members of the entire process.
Thank you.
Minimum Wage Advisory Committee, report on establishing a minimum wage regime in the Cayman Islands, February 2015, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs.
I recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for employment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the report of the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee entitled Report on Establishing a Minimum Wage Regime in the Cayman Islands, February 2015.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Minister wish to speak on her report?
Yes, Madam Speaker, thank you. Madam Speaker, on behalf of the government, it is with great pleasure that I present this Honourable House the report on establishing a minimum wage in the Cayman Islands, which was submitted to me last month by the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee. The report, which has been presented to the Government Caucus and Cabinet, is now currently with Government to consider the recommendations proposed by the committee. Madam Speaker, today marks history for this country and for the government and for the people of the Cayman Islands. And as such, Madam Speaker, I believe it is necessary for me to take some time to outline to this Honourable House and for the listening public's benefit the significance of today and the milestone that we as a country have achieved in tabling this report. Today, Madam Speaker, we have now finally arrived at a point where we can have an informed discussion and the government can now make an informed decision about the implementation of a national minimum wage regime based on solid quantitative, qualitative, statistical, and economic analysis conducted by the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee and guided by the International Labour Organization's technical advisor using the ILO's internationally accepted methodology. Madam Speaker, over the last 30 years, and in particular over the last 15 years, there have been various national discussions, and there's been much talk about the issue of a minimum wage or the lack thereof in the Cayman Islands. In fact, Madam Speaker, in 2001, the government of the day passed a motion regarding the establishment of a minimum wage. However, nothing was done subsequently by the government of that day to move the process along beyond just passing the motion. And similarly, Madam Speaker, 10 years later, in 2011, the UDP administration accepted a motion to establish a national minimum wage of $5 per hour. However, Madam Speaker, again, nothing was done by the government of the day to take the process beyond just talk and passing the motion. Yet, Madam Speaker, the provisions to establish a minimum wage has existed in the labor law since the law was first enacted in 1987. In fact, the now superseded minimum wage law of 1946 contained essentially the same provisions enabling the administrator of the islands to appoint advisory boards for the purpose of advising and assisting in establishing a minimum wage regime. Therefore, Madam Speaker, the process by which to establish a minimum wage regime has been well entrenched in our laws for well over 50 years. There has been ample time, Madam Speaker, and ample opportunities for various governments and various administrations over the years to do something about this issue if any of them were serious about doing something about the issue, Madam Speaker. Yet, Madam Speaker, this is the first time that any government has had the fortitude to carry out the process and to move beyond just talking about the issue. And Madam Speaker, I would add that it took this coalition government to achieve this. Madam Speaker, the government has been looking into this issue since taking office. In a visit to the UK in January in 2014, I met with a number of people at the UK Low Pay Commission in order to learn more about the process of determining an appropriate minimum wage regime for the Cayman Islands and to consider the work and the information that needed to be conducted and gathered in order to be able to carry out the process and for the government to be in a position to make an informed decision. Madam Speaker, we have progressed a long way since then and since the debate in the Legislative Assembly that occurred in February of last year. At that time, when the government rejected the private member's motion to amend the labour law to prescribe a $5 minimum wage, there were more questions than answers regarding implementing a minimum wage and the impact of establishing such a minimum wage regime in the Cayman Islands. Madam Speaker, as you will recall, the government rejected the private member's motion at that time, not because we did not believe that a minimum wage should be established, but because we were not convinced that $5 an hour was the appropriate wage to adopt. At that time, there was no research and no analysis conducted in order to help us determine how the regime would be implemented and what kind of economic impact that figure would have on the people most affected and the economy as a whole. However, Madam Speaker, I am pleased to say that the information contained in the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee's report allows us, as a government, as a people, and as a country, to finally move beyond just talking about this issue as a wishful want, but to really understand and now be able to comprehend the implications that a minimum wage will have on the labour market and to those who will be most affected. Madam Speaker, in June 2014, the country's first ever Minimum Wage Advisory Committee was established and convened as required by Sections 20 and 21 of the Labour Law Revision 2011 to provide recommendations on implementing a minimum wage in the Cayman Islands. Madam Speaker, it is international best practice for the setting of minimum wage to be, as best as possible, a tripartite exercise, with government bringing employer and employee representation to the negotiating table. However, given the fact that there is a lack of established labour unions and other labour representative organizations in the Cayman Islands, with only the Cayman Islands Civil Service Association being recognized as a representative of public sector labour, it was extremely important to ensure that the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee consisted of an equal representation of independent stakeholders, of employers and employees or civil society representatives. The government was also keen to ensure that the committee membership was gender balanced, Madam Speaker, and that the members recognized the contributions of and the challenges related to young people in relation to labour by actually having young people represented on the committee. Madam Speaker, throughout the life of the project, the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee always comprised of 12 members, 4 independent members, 4 employer members, and 4 employees or civil society representatives, despite a few membership changes during the 9-month period. And it was supported by non-voting ex officio members from the civil service, including members from the Department of Labour and Pensions, Economics and Statistics Office, and the Immigration Department, and including a small secretariat comprised of staff of the Ministry of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs. Madam Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank the Chair and members of the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee for their dedication to completing this historic exercise and for completing the project within the very ambitious time frame of 9 months, as was requested by Cabinet. In fact, Madam Speaker, as this is such a memorable occasion in our history, I wish to publicly identify and thank each member of the committee for his and her hard work and time spent serving the country on this very important assignment. On behalf of the government, Madam Speaker, I start by sincerely thanking Mr. Lemuel Hurlston, an independent member who ably served as the chair of the committee and provided excellent stewardship throughout this entire process. I would also like to thank the other independent members of the committee, which includes Mr. Nick Joseph, the Deputy Chair and nominee from the Caymanian Bar Association, Ms. Maria Zingapan, and later followed by Mr. Adolphus Laidlow of the Economics and Statistics Office, and Ms. Annette Murphy from the University College of the Cayman Islands. Madam Speaker, I would also like to thank those persons who served as employer representatives on the committee, which included Mr. Woody Foster from the Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Danielle Wolfe from the Cayman Islands Tourism Association, Mr. Ian Paradu from the Cayman Contractors Association, and Ms. Aisha Bawden from the Cayman Islands Society of Human Resource Professionals. Madam Speaker, I also would like to sincerely thank those persons who served to represent the interests of employees as well as important demographics in our society, such as women, youth, and Sister Islands representation, including Ms. Andrea Williams from the Business and Professional Women's Club, Mr. Stephen Tatum, the Cayman Bracken Little Cayman representative, Mr. Pierre Conley from Rotaract Club of Grand Cayman, Rotary Sunrise, and Ms. Lauren Langlois from Rotaract Club of Grand Cayman, Rotary Sunrise. And finally, Madam Speaker, I would like to sincerely thank the civil servant ex officio members of the committee which included Mr. Kristen Suku, Acting Chief Officer of the Ministry of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, who initially served as the ministry liaison to the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee until the 1st of September upon taking up a new post and responsibility within the ministry. I'd like to thank Ms. Tammy Ebanks, the Acting Deputy Chief Officer and Senior Policy Officer for Gender in the Ministry of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, who served as the ministry's liaison thereafter 1st of September. Mrs. Kimberly Connell, Communications Manager and Policy Analyst in my ministry, who also served as the committee's secretary. Mr. Philip Scott, the Senior Policy Advisor for Human Capital Development in the Ministry of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs. Mr. Mario Ebanks, Director of the Department of Labor and Pensions. Ms. Linda Evans, followed by Mr. Bruce Smith of the Immigration Department, and Ms. Aubrey Bawden, Policy Officer for Gender in the ministry, who was seconded to assist the committee's secretariat. Madam Speaker, none of this would be possible without the hard work, the dedication, and commitment of the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee and the staff of the Ministry of Education, Employment and Gender Affairs, which supported the work of the committee throughout the entire process. Again, I sincerely thank the committee on behalf of the government for producing a report of such high quality, which demonstrates thorough research and analysis that will greatly assist the government in making its final decisions. Madam Speaker, given that this was the first time in our history that such an exercise had been conducted in the Cayman Islands, the terms of reference for the committee were expansive, with the committee being asked to address many pertinent questions, such as, should there be one basic minimum wage or separate minimum wages based on industry or other economic sector differentiation? Should there be different minimum wages established according to age, with special consideration of any differentiation needed for young people? Should there be differentiated minimum wages established for Caymanians compared to non-Caymanians? Should other appropriate pay components, such as gratuities and in-kind payments, such as housing, food, etc., be used in calculating the minimum wage? Should a minimum wage apply to workers in non-governmental, not-for-profit, and charitable organizations? And Madam Speaker, you will see that the full terms of reference can be found in Annex 3 to the report. Madam Speaker, the key questions that the government and that the country needed to consider and that the government was concerned about and wanted more information on as it relates to establishing a minimum wage form the basis of the objectives set for the exercise. The committee was provided with the terms of reference as approved by Cabinet, which included the following objectives. Objective 1, to identify minimum wage points that will address exploitation and provide real relief to the lowest paid workers. And Objective 2, to identify minimum wage points that would improve employment opportunities to Caymanians in relation to decreasing the demand for imported workers. Madam Speaker, These were the terms of reference given, but as a result of the research and technical guidance provided from the International Labour Organization and the recommendation of the ILO technical advisor, the committee did not provide the minimum wage rate recommendation in relation to Objective 2, but did, however, provide other recommendations that would assist in achieving this objective. The report on establishing a minimum wage regime in the Cayman Islands is over 100 pages long and contains the full details of the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee's recommendations for a minimum wage figure and the components necessary for a minimum wage regime to be implemented in the Cayman Islands. Madam Speaker, throughout the process, the work of the committee was guided by a qualified labour specialist from the International Labour Organization. The committee carried out a holistic public consultation and data collection process to gauge the thoughts and opinions of the public on establishing a minimum wage regime and to obtain important information that was not previously available in the Cayman Islands. It is important to note that the support provided by the technical advisor, Mr. Reynolds Simmons, from the International Labour Organization's Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean was provided at no charge to the government, whereby the government only had to pay for the travel costs associated with Mr. Simmons' mission visit to Grand Cayman. This ILO assistance provided allowed for huge cost savings to the government, Madam Speaker, as it related to the final cost of conducting this exercise, coming to an approximately $80,000 in total. As the ILO's Senior Specialist for Employment and Labour Market Policies, Mr. Simmons' technical guidance greatly assisted the committee in understanding the necessary issues to consider when determining a minimum wage, the limitations of the data which they had to work with, and also the possible methods in which to derive at a figure for a minimum wage. Mr. Simmons has extensive knowledge on minimum wage setting and implementation and produced a report entitled Statistical Aspects to Setting the Minimum Wage in the Cayman Islands, which is Annex 1 of the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee's report. Madam Speaker, Mr. Simmons' report provided a comprehensive review of available statistical sources and data and options for the committee to consider when setting the minimum wage. And many of the recommendations proposed by Mr. Simmons in his report were supported by the committee and form part of their recommendations outlined in their report. Madam Speaker, we are very much appreciative to Mr. Simmons and the ILO for providing this invaluable service to support the Cayman Islands with this landmark exercise. Madam Speaker, in addition to receiving technical guidance provided by the ILO, another key element of the exercise was the comprehensive public consultation process conducted by the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee. The public consultation process involved different activities at various stages throughout the 9-month period, including meeting with key stakeholders such as the Chamber of Commerce, the Department of Children and Family Services and the Needs Assessment Unit, the Cayman Islands Tourism Association, and the Cayman Contractors Association, and others. Madam Speaker, focus group meetings were held in Cayman Brac and in Grand Cayman to collect qualitative data and to explore people's beliefs, people's attitudes and opinions on the subject of a minimum wage. The focus groups targeted household and business employers, household and business employees, unemployed Caymanians, and the youth. Madam Speaker, there were also district town hall meetings held in Cayman Brac and in all districts in Grand Cayman. Written submissions were also invited by the general public and non-governmental organizations. 5 surveys, Madam Speaker, were designed to solicit opinions on the topic of minimum wage, to ask about probable behaviors in relation to the implementation of a minimum wage, and to collect personal data such as income from employees and pay rates used by employers. The surveys targeted business employers, business employees, household employers, household employees, and general public, including unemployed Caymanians. Madam Speaker, the surveys were administered online through printed copies in the district libraries, including Cayman Brac and Little Cayman Post Office, and they were administered in the field to randomly selected individuals or businesses by trained enumerators contracted through the assistance of the Economics and Statistics Office. In total, or a total of 568 people took part in the online surveys, and a total of 2,097 surveys were administered by representatives of the Economics and Statistics Office. Madam Speaker, the committee received feedback or representations from a total of 2,792 people and organizations. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank those individuals and businesses that took time to complete the surveys, to attend meetings, or to provide their feedback in whatever way to the committee. Madam Speaker, from the public consultation process, the committee received clear support for the establishment of a minimum wage in the Cayman Islands, with 89% stating yes, 5.4% stating no, and 5.6% saying don't know, not sure. While the general public has indicated clear support for establishing a minimum wage, on reading the report and from representations made by the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee, it would seem that based on the public feedback and opinions provided to the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee during this process, that many persons in the public are, however, thinking in terms of a living wage as opposed to a minimum wage. And as illustrated by the committee in the report, there is a distinct difference between the two. Madam Speaker, a minimum wage as defined by the ILO is a sum payable to a worker for work performed or services rendered within a given period or collective agreement, which is guaranteed by law and which may be fixed in such a way as to cover the minimum needs of the worker or his or her family in light of the national economic and social conditions. In contrast, Madam Speaker, a living wage is based on the basic cost of living in a country or area within a country. It is not enforceable by law, and there is no universally accepted definition of a living wage or agreement as to how to calculate it. Madam Speaker, out of the 2,097 respondents of the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee field surveys, 80.2% identified cost of living as the most important factor in determining a minimum wage for the Cayman Islands, and age was identified as the least important factor, with only 10.2% indicating was it as being the most important factor. Based on the importance placed on the cost of living by those who participated in the public consultation process, and from some feedback that we have already heard since the report was made public last week at a press conference, the committee anticipated that there would be some persons in the community who will not be satisfied with the committee's recommended minimum wage figure. However, Madam Speaker, the committee did not deviate from its focus, which was to identify a minimum wage in an attempt to try to determine a living wage. The committee followed the terms of reference, which was to identify a minimum wage that would address exploitation and provide real relief to the lowest paid workers. Madam Chair, it is not that the country should not be concerned about or should not aspire to having a living wage regime. However, as the chair of the committee so aptly put in his foreword to the report, this is a commencement of an ongoing exercise that should benefit the economy and labor relations in the future. The completion of this Minimum Wage Advisory Committee exercise and report was the first real start in earnest, Madam Speaker. A start that has been a long time coming, given the amount of discussion on this topic, which has been generated over the past several decades. Madam Speaker, in looking at the data contained in the report, the ILO consultant, Mr. Simmons, identified in his report that employees earning what was classified as very low wages and low wages make up 29% of all employees in the Cayman Islands. Of that 29%, very low wages made up of 7% and were defined as employees in the labor force survey as persons who earned less than $4.61 per hour, and low wages constituted 22% and were defined as employees who earned between $4.62 and $9.23 per hour. The report found that there are 2.6 times more non-Caymanian workers than Caymanians in the very low and low-wage segments of our economy. And the 4 industries identified as employing 72.3% of all very low-wage earners are industries that include wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicles and motorcycles, restaurants and mobile food service activities, administration and support service activities, which include security guards, activities of households as employers, which includes domestic helpers and other elementary occupations. Madam Speaker, the 5 industries identified as employing 70.3% of all low-wage earners are wholesale and retail trade, repair of motor vehicle and motorcycles, restaurant and mobile food services activities, administration and support service activities, activities of households as employers, and construction. Madam Speaker, it's important to note that 1/3 of the very low and low wage earners are in industries outside of these 5 industries identified. Therefore, if a minimum wage was set only for the 5 very low or low wage industries, this would exclude 1/3 of very low and low wage earners, amongst which many are Caymanians. 2,683 Caymanians are classified as very low or low wage employees, with 655 as very low and 2,028 as low paid employees. Therefore, Madam Speaker, Caymanians make up 27.6% of this very low or low wage segment of the labour market. In order to ensure that no low-income earning Caymanians in sectors outside the 5 identified low-wage sectors would be excluded, as many low-paid employees are covered, and to ensure that as many low-paid employees are covered as possible, the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee unanimously agreed to recommend that the minimum wage should be a national minimum wage that is applied across the board to all sectors of employment in the Cayman Islands. Madam Speaker, it is also important to note that within the classifications of persons being considered non-Caymanian, this includes persons who are married to Caymanians, permanent residents, and other persons who have real and long-term connection to the Cayman Islands and connections to Caymanian families and households. Madam Speaker, as all of the members of this Honourable House would have heard by now, the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee has recommended CI $6 per hour gross as an acceptable introductory minimum wage rate that would achieve the objective of addressing exploitation and providing real relief to the lowest paid workers. This recommendation, Madam Speaker, is based on the analysis of the data provided from the committee's public consultation exercise and various other national data sources, and on the research and technical support provided by qualified advisors. Madam Speaker, the committee has suggested in its report that the national minimum wage rate apply as follows: an across-the-board rate applicable to all employees as defined in the labour law, including employees in the household domestic sector and employees of non-profit charitable organizations. The committee has recommended that it applies equally to Caymanians and non-Caymanians. The committee has recommended that no age distinctions, the minimum wage rate should apply equally to persons of all ages who are legally defined as employees in the labour law. The committee has recommended that it should not apply to self-employed persons. And the committee has recommended that it apply to every hour worked either within the standard work week or standard work day as defined in the labour law. Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker, the committee also recommends that special provisions are given to employers in relation to gratuities and commissions and for household employers who employ live-in employees. The special provisions are as follows. The committee recommends that no more than 25% of the $6 minimum wage rate, i.e. $1.50, be paid by gratuities or commissions. Therefore, at least 75% of the minimum wage rate must come directly from the employer. Madam Speaker, this recommendation this exception is recommended by the committee to only apply to businesses that has, or a business that has a scheme in accordance with the gratuities regulations and that is in good standing and has been approved in writing by the Director of Labour and Pensions in accordance with the current labour law and regulations. Madam Speaker, recognizing that household as employer industry will be most affected by the introduction of a minimum wage, the committee recommends that a maximum of 25%, i.e. $1.50 of the in-kind credit for accommodations and utilities only be applied to the $6 per hour gross minimum wage rate, but only for household employers with live-in employees. Madam Speaker, the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee also recommends that gratuities and commission-based employers are required to provide, at the very least, the minimum wage rate, i.e. the recommended $6 per hour when calculating an employee's vacation, sick, maternity and paternity leave, etc., and the issue of whether or not gratuities and commissions are also to be included in these monetary calculations of leave time should also be given consideration and subject to legislative review. Madam Speaker, in order to decide on a minimum wage, there normally is an established and nationally recognized poverty line or vulnerability threshold that is agreed that no one in the country should earn below. However, in absence of a formally recognized poverty line in the Cayman Islands, the committee had to determine what it would use as its floor rate in order to make the recommendations that the committee made in their report. Madam Speaker, the committee agreed that the minimum wage should be set above any kind of suggested poverty line or vulnerability threshold line for the Cayman Islands. Therefore, in order to calculate a minimum wage rate, the committee established the Cayman Islands Economic Vulnerability Threshold, or CIEVT for short. The CIEVT rate is the minimum amount that a worker needs to earn in order to not slip below the poverty marker that the committee used as a guide, which was $4.18 per hour. The committee determined that it was necessary for each income earner to make at least $5.22 per hour, which is the Cayman Islands Economic Vulnerability Rate. The CIEVT is 125% of the poverty line used by the committee, and calculating the vulnerability line, or the CIEVT, as 25% more than the poverty line is an internationally accepted methodology to use. And Madam Speaker, the report goes into great detail about how this analysis and how they determined this actual or these rates as it relates to the Cayman Islands Economic Vulnerability Threshold. Once the committee had agreed upon the CIEVT rate as the established poverty threshold, the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee also analyzed the wages currently paid to employees through the ESO's labor force surveys and the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee's minimum wage surveys administered to businesses and household employers. In order to avoid driving wage distribution upwards, thereby impacting negatively on macroeconomic stability and negatively on employment levels by increasing the potential for job losses, the committee analyzed the low value added industries' ability to pay a minimum wage that was greater than the CIEVT figure of $5.22 per hour. Madam Speaker, this data analysis assisted the committee in determining its recommended figure, which the committee believes would decrease the exploitation of labor and provide real relief to the lowest paid workers, and that low-paying industries have the capacity to pay, thereby minimizing the negative impacts in terms of potential job losses. Madam Speaker, data from the Economics and Statistics Office's Labor Force Survey 2013 shows that 2,367 employees were earning less than $4.61 per hour. In other words, approximately 65% of the workforce was earning less than the CIEVT of $5.22 per hour. The $6 per hour proposed minimum wage by the committee will directly benefit an estimated 5,962 employed persons, or 15.8% of the entire employed labor force of the Cayman Islands. This number is broken down into 3,362 as being business employees, 2,600 as being household employees, 1,524 or 25.6% of those are Caymanian, and 4,438 or 74.4% of those being non-Caymanian. Again, Madam Speaker, it is important to note that persons grouped and coded by the ESO as non-Caymanian in the labor force surveys includes persons married to Caymanians, permanent residents, and others who have long-term connection to this country and to Caymanian families and households. So non-Caymanian, Madam Speaker, is not necessarily synonymous with or the same as work permit holders, as many may think. Madam Speaker, household employees, domestic workers in particular, will benefit the greatest with an estimated wage increase of $1.86 per employee per hour. Of this group or category of worker, 169 were found to be Caymanians, which were 6.5% of that particular category of workers, and 2,431 were found to be non-Caymanians, or 93.5% of that category of worker. Employees in the following occupations would receive the following estimated wage increases per hour at the recommended $6 per hour minimum wage rate. Administrative and support services activities, so those including security guards, janitorial, cleaning services, and car rentals, would receive on average $1 per hour increase. Accommodation establishments would receive on average 54 cents increase, and restaurant and mobile food services would receive $1.11 per hour increase estimated. Madam Speaker, the overall direct cost of the proposed minimum wage is $17 million or $17.6 million in annual terms, with businesses expected to pay $7.54 million and households paying $10.06 million. Madam Speaker, this $17.6 million figure to implement the minimum wage amounts to approximately 1.2% of the total compensation paid to employees annually. Of the $7.54 million, Madam Speaker, that will cost the business sector, the benefits to employees who work for those businesses will be $3.88 million for Caymanians and $3.65 million for non-Caymanians. So these are the way that the actual employees of the business sector would benefit with real increases in pay. Small businesses, Madam Speaker, firms with less than 5 employees will be the most impacted with payments to approximately 1,233 employees. These businesses account for 36.7% of all employees of businesses who are earning less than the proposed minimum wage. However, Madam Speaker, businesses with 50 or more employees will see higher payments to 691 or 20.6% employees. Of the $10.6 million or $10.06 million that it will cost households, the benefits to employees who work for households as employers will be Caymanians will receive $0.4 million and non-Caymanians will receive $9.66 million. So again, these are the benefits that the actual employees themselves would receive as a result of the introduction of a minimum wage regime at the proposed rate. Madam Speaker, the estimated overall jobs lost as a result of the proposed minimum wage can range from 545 to 600, or 1.4% to 1.6% of the total employed, with a plus or minus 5%. This was what the committee found in conducting its research, Madam Speaker. This would be an estimated 190 household employees and an estimated 382 business employees. It is assumed by the committee that these job losses, however, Madam Speaker, will exclusively affect work permit holders rather than Caymanians and permanent residents. Although, Madam Speaker, the employers of persons losing jobs will, in many cases, be Caymanians or permanent residents. Again, Madam Speaker, this is an estimate provided by the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee, but in speaking with the committee and in various forums, the chair has indicated that the expectation is that job loss itself will be minimal based on the other experiences of other countries when they introduced a conservative minimum wage rate, such as this one proposed. Madam Speaker, at the proposed $6 per hour rate recommended by the committee, the following two assumptions or scenarios show the estimated impact on the cost of living as reflected in the anticipated impact on the average consumer price index inflation. If, Madam Speaker, the entire 100% additional cost to businesses, excluding the cost to household employers, is passed through to consumers in the form of higher prices of goods and services, it is estimated that 0.85% increase will occur in the consumer price index. The strongest impact is expected in an increase in housing and utilities of 0.28% and a 0.13% increase in miscellaneous goods and services. Madam Speaker, this data contradicts the assumptions that have been discussed in many public domains about the increase being expected at a large scale in terms of the cost of living, and especially when it relates to at the supermarket with the food prices. Because in fact, Madam Speaker, as was discussed by the Economics and Statistics Officer representative of the committee at the press conference held on the 9th of April, most supermarkets on average already pay wages that are above the proposed minimum wage. Madam Speaker, the other scenario considered was that if 50% of the business employers' additional costs are passed through to the price increases, the average CPI inflation would then be estimated at 0.58%, with housing and utilities contributing approximately 0.19%. Therefore, Madam Speaker, it's important to stress that the likely impact of introducing a $6 per hour minimum wage to the cost of living in terms of increased prices would be minimal, less than 1% in both scenarios. In relation to the impact of implementing this minimum wage rate on GDP growth, Madam Speaker, the following are two of the more important and most likely scenarios as determined by the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee that were considered. If businesses can only pass on 50% of the additional cost to customers, coupled with Caymanians spending 100% of the additional income in the local economy, while non-Caymanians spend 50%, then GDP growth is anticipated to increase by 0.74%, while inflation-adjusted GDP growth is expected at 0.16%. If, Madam Speaker, 572 of the estimated layoffs are non-Caymanian and the remaining Caymanians retain their jobs and spend 50% of the additional income and employed Caymanians continue to spend 100% of the additional income, then the expected result is zero as it relates to current GDP growth. Madam Speaker, and finally, the most favorable impact on economic growth would be if all additional earnings are spent locally with no employee layoffs. Economic growth would then be expected to be enhanced by 1.19%, while economic growth adjusted for inflation caused by higher prices from cost pass-through will be an additional 0.33%. So, Madam Speaker, in the best case scenario considered by the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee, we see a slight increase in GDP growth for the company as a result of the introduction of a minimum wage at the recommended $6 per hour. Madam Speaker, the committee stated in its report that it recommends that the first minimum wage regime should err on the side of caution by starting at a conservative rate, as it is easier to increase an existing minimum wage rate than lower one. The committee also has stated that it considers their recommended minimum wage regime to be a simple and easily understood system for enforcement and to begin with, and it considers the recommended $6 per hour gross rate to be fair, conservative wage rate and would be affordable to employers and beneficial to very low wage employees. Madam Speaker, it is important to note that a minimum wage should take into account the needs of the individual and his or her family, the employee, and the needs of the economy and the capability of the employer to be able to pay. Therefore, Madam Speaker, setting a minimum wage requires a balancing act to ensure there is economic stability, but at the same time allowing people to meet their basic needs. And while the government wants to ensure that all people in the Cayman Islands have a decent standard of living, Madam Speaker, and personally would love to be able to legislate to provide the provision of a living wage, whatever that would be, the information in this report, the empirical data and information gathered and analyzed in this report clearly provides evidence that consideration must be given to the capacity for businesses to pay, and that it would be highly irresponsible for the government to set a minimum wage rate to the level that would satisfy some of the critics of the proposed $6 rate without quantifying and without knowing the impacts of any other proposed rate. Madam Speaker, quite simply put, the higher the basic minimum wage set above the $6 per hour recommended rate of the committee, the greater the likely increase in the cost of living due to higher increases in prices as a result of those costs being passed on to the consumer, the greater likely impact on job losses, and an increased probability in creating instability within the businesses and the economy. Madam Speaker, the committee has informed the government that the recommended minimum wage rate is only valid for 1 year after submission of this report, which was in February of this year. And they have also recommended a 6-month period from the date the minimum wage is established in the labor law to the date which it is enforceable, in order to allow businesses and household employers ample time to prepare. Additionally, Madam Speaker, in order to continue to be a valid instrument of social protection, the committee has recommended an annual review of the minimum wage for effectiveness by technical experts and a quadrennial review by future minimum wage advisory committees for fixing procedures and criteria. Madam Speaker, given the cross-cutting nature of the topics of labor supply, employment levels, immigration, poverty, and the like, the committee has rightly identified several recommended synergies to be developed within the government in order to support the implementation of the suggested minimum wage regime. These include, Madam Speaker, and the recommendations include to improve current data collection methods and introducing new data collection methods within the government. For example, by creating a third category to capture the permanent residents, persons married to Caymanians, and other connected persons to Caymanian households when conducting the labor force and other economic surveys. Further analysis and research of certain types of unemployed persons. Review of government policies, in particular the temporary poor relief and immigration policies that would directly influence the effectiveness of the proposed minimum wage regime. Increase information technology and synergies between government departments. Leverage other institutional capabilities and relationships within the civil service and the government for monitoring and compliance. And increase attention and public awareness and education efforts as it regards to 3 key issues, Madam Speaker, 3 qualitative issues which were identified in the focus groups conducted. The concern expressed about the high levels of exploitation and contractual breaches experienced by household employees. Also, the concerns expressed of the stereotyping, Madam Speaker, of Caymanians as being lazy or not good workers by some employers and others in the community. And Madam Speaker, the concern that was expressed that some young people in the Cayman Islands were not open to the idea of working all types, or working in all types of industries. This report is a rich report with respect to some of the concerns expressed by those participating, and it is incumbent upon the government to look at seeing how we can address some of these issues flagged by the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee. Madam Speaker, while the Department of Labour and Pensions will more than likely have the key role in enforcement of a minimum wage, it is quite clear from the report that there are other key departments and entities within and across government, such as the Economics and Statistics Office, the Immigration Department, the Needs Assessment Unit, and the Department of Children and Family Services, the Department of Commerce and Investment, and the National Workforce Development Agency, to name a few, that will also have key roles to play to ensure that the minimum wage regime operates effectively. Madam Speaker, it is imperative that the same interministerial collaboration that took place within the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee at the planning and development stage continues into the implementation phase once the government has taken a decision to do so in order for such a regime to be successful. Madam Speaker, in order to implement the suggested minimum wage regime, the committee also made suggestions for various legislative amendments to be made to the current version of the labour law. I am pleased to report that several of the committee's suggested amendments to the labour law are ones that had already been considered and proposed in our current review of the legislation by the Department of Labour and Pensions and are supported by the Ministry's policy steer of labour relations reform. Namely, these include the introduction of an administrative fine regime and the introduction of whistleblower provisions. Additionally, Madam Speaker, the committee made suggestions for other important legislative changes. These suggestions apply to the labour law regulations, labour law, immigration law, and the special economic zones law, and include the following recommendations. Provide a template for information returns to the Department of Labour and Pensions. Ensure that a contract of employment is accompanied with all work permit applications. Support the implementation of an employer accreditation system. Amend the special economic zone law to state that an employee cannot be paid lower than the minimum wage as defined in the labour law. Madam Speaker, last February, when debating this issue in the Legislative Assembly, I indicated that the determination of an appropriate national minimum wage structure for the Cayman Islands must be based on well-informed socio-economic principles, research, and analysis. As you can see from the broad overview just provided on the research, analysis, and recommendations contained in the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee's report, I am delighted to state that this report did just that, and the committee has provided us with a robust, well-thought-out, well-articulated report rich with empirical and statistical data, research, and analysis. Given the potential to affect the lives of the people of this community and the operations of the businesses in the Cayman Islands, it is important to the government to have recommendations based on quantitative and qualitative information. Madam Speaker, this report is a landmark achievement for the Cayman Islands, one in which we can all celebrate as a result of the comprehensive nature and integrity of the process undertaken by the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee. As a country, we are in a much better position to make an informed, evidence-based decision now as we move forward in our efforts to establish an appropriate minimum wage regime in the Cayman Islands. Madam Speaker, as a country, as a government, we can now finally move beyond just talking about this issue in a vacuum. We now have a report which helps us to understand the implications of a national minimum wage at the recommended rate to the labour market and those most affected. As the Minister of Employment and as the independent member of Cabinet, Madam Speaker, just over a year ago, I gave a commitment on behalf of this government in this honourable House to the people of this country that the legally mandated process of establishing a minimum wage would be taken forward and would be carried out in a timely fashion. Madam Speaker, today I have delivered on that commitment on behalf of the PPM-led coalition government. Madam Speaker, it is now up to the government as a whole to consider the recommendations of the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee's report and to take the matter forward as the government sees fit. This is, in essence, an advisory report which is now with the government to make its determinations accordingly. Madam Speaker, I encourage all members of this Honourable House and members of the public to read the report, which can be found on the Ministry's website at www.education.gov.ky/minimum wage, and to submit any comments you may have on the recommendations outlined therein to the Ministry by emailing minimumwage@gov.ky. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Madam Clerk. Madam Clerk, please proceed.
Cayman Islands Health Services Authority financial service statements ending 30th of June 2012 to be laid on the table of the Legislative Assembly by the Honourable Minister of Home Affairs, Health and Culture.
Recognize Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Section 52(5) of the Public Management and Finance Law, I am pleased today to place before this Honourable House the audit report of the Cayman Islands Health Services Authority for the fiscal year ended 30th of June 2012. The Cayman Islands Health Services Authority is a statutory body that was established as an authority on July 1st, 2002, under the Health Services Authority law. The purpose of the Health Services Authority is to provide healthcare services and facilities in the Cayman Islands in accordance with the national...
Honourable Premier, sorry for the interruption. Would you wish to lay it at this time?
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I got ahead of myself there. I should have laid it before I spoke to it. Madam Speaker, the Health Services Authority is a statutory body that was established as an authority on July 1st, 2002 under the Health Services Authority law. The purpose of the Health Services Authority is to provide healthcare services and facilities in the Cayman Islands in accordance with the National Strategic Plan for Health prepared by the Cayman Islands government. Madam Speaker, the authority provides primary and secondary levels of healthcare services for the three islands, and its facilities include the following healthcare agencies: the Cayman Islands Hospital in Georgetown, Grand Cayman, and Faith Hospital in Cayman Brac. There are also a number of community-based services, including the Little Cayman Health Center, Georgetown General Practice Clinic, West Bay Health Center, Bodtown Health Center, East End Health Center, Northside Health Center, the Public Health Unit, the Lions Eye Clinic, the Georgetown Dental Clinic, Merrin's Dental Clinic, and the Cayman Brac Dental Clinic. Madam Speaker, in reviewing the audited financial statements for the year ended 30th of June 2012, the Health Authority recorded total revenues from government, patient service fees, and other services of $85,697,298. The total operating expenses reported were $90,307,001. The reported net loss for the year was $4,609,703. This loss is significantly greater than the loss reported in the previous year, 2010-11, which was only $244,111. The current assets for the year were reported at $28,511,524, and the fixed assets were $64,952,809. The Health Services Authority also reported total assets of $93,464,333 and total liabilities of $13,859,097. The net assets for the year were reported at $79,605,236. At 30th of June 2012, the Health Services Authority ended the fiscal period with a positive cash balance of $8.1 million. Madam Speaker, the Auditor General completed the audit and issued a qualified opinion on the financial statements of the Health Services Authority for the period ended 30th of June 2012. A qualified opinion means that a portion of the financial statements cannot be relied upon, but the rest of the statements can be relied upon by the reader. Madam Speaker, the Auditor General pointed out 4 significant matters that influenced him to arrive at his opinion. The management of the Health Services Authority provided responses to the Ministry on 20th of January this year. 1. Ineffective controls over completeness of patient revenues. The Auditor General stated that he was unable to satisfy himself that the stated patient service fees of $71.2 million are complete. In response, the Health Services Authority management noted that the HSA has implemented organizational policies and procedures to ensure revenue completeness. Completeness and valuation of patient-related accounts receivables. The Auditor General stated that he was unable to satisfy himself of the completeness and valuation of accounts receivable as at 30th of June 2012. In response, the HSA management noted that the resolution of revenue completeness will resolve this issue on HSA's accounts receivable. Inability to ascertain the accuracy, existence, and valuation of year-end inventory. The Auditor General stated that he was unable to satisfy himself of the accuracy, existence, and valuation of inventory as at 30th of June 2012. In response, the HSA management noted that this was addressed with the implementation of additional controls in the 13-14 fiscal year. Uncertainties due to modified and disclaimers of opinion on prior year's financial statements. The Auditor General stated that because of the disclaimers of audit opinion on the Health Authority's financial statements for the years 2005 to 6 all the way through to 2009-10, and the qualified opinion in 2011-12, he was unable to determine the accuracy of accumulated deficit as reported in the balance sheet and the statement of changes in net worth. In response, the HSA management noted that this issue would be raised with the Office of the Auditor General as to the length of time this type of weakness will remain on its books, as the HSA expects with an unqualified opinion. This weakness will go away. Madam Speaker, the Auditor General opinion was that except for the possible effects of the adjustments necessary in respect of the matters discussed in the basis for qualified opinion paragraph above, these financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the HSA as at 30th of June 2012 and the results of its financial performance and its cash flow for the year then ended in accordance with international financial reporting standards. Madam Speaker, in closing, I would like to publicly thank the board and management of the HSA for their hard work and perseverance in producing these annual reports and in responding to the significant matters raised by the Auditor General that form the basis of the qualified opinion. I invite members of this Honourable House and the public to review these reports in detail. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
Cayman National Cultural Foundation Annual Financial Statements for the year ending 30th June 2014, to be laid on the table of the Legislative Assembly by the Honourable Minister of Home Affairs, Health and Culture.
Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Section 17(2) of the Cayman National Cultural Foundation Law and Section 52(2) and 5 of the Public Management and Finance Law, I beg to lay on the table of this Honorable House the audit report of the Cayman National Cultural Foundation for the fiscal year ended 30th of June 2014.
So ordered. Does the Honorable Premier wish to speak to his report?
Thank
Sarge.
you. Yes, Madam Speaker.
Sergeant.
Madam Speaker, the Cayman National Cultural Foundation is a non-profit organization domiciled in the Cayman Islands and is owned and regulated by the government of the Cayman Islands. The foundation was formed on October 9, 1984 in accordance with the Cayman National Cultural Foundation law. It came into effect on September 1st. The Cayman National Cultural Foundation Law 2013 came into effect on September 1st, 2013 and constituted the foundation as a statutory authority within the Cayman Islands Public Service. The foundation is funded primarily by an annual grant from the government through the Ministry of Home Affairs, Health and Culture. Madam Speaker, the statement of financial performance of the foundation shows that the revenues increased over the previous year by $118,000. The government annual grant was increased by $112,000 from $567,000 to $679,000. The loss recorded for the year was $99,000, whilst the loss for the previous year was $191,000. The result shows that the foundation is dependent heavily on government for financing in order to operate. The foundation's statement of financial position, Madam Speaker, shows that total assets decreased from the previous year by $55,000. Also, the accumulated fund decreased by $99,000, the loss incurred during the year. The current liabilities contain a large amount, $418,000, that are owed to the Cayman Islands Government Risk Management Unit for insurance coverage provided, which accumulated annually. Madam Speaker, in coming to his opinion on the Foundation's financial statements, the Auditor General relied on the work carried out by KPMG, who performed their work in accordance with international standards for auditing. The Auditor General issued an unmodified opinion on the Foundation's financial statements for the year ending June 30th, 2014. The term unmodified opinion is the new term now used by the international auditing standards, and it is synonymous with the previously used term unqualified opinion. It means that the information contained within the financial statements can be relied upon by the reader or user. Madam Speaker, the Auditor General stated that in his opinion, the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the Foundation as of June 30th, 2014, and its financial performance and its cash flows for each of the years then ended in accordance with international public sector accounting standards. Madam Speaker, the Auditor General wrote that there was only one management letter point in relation to trade payables in the current liabilities. He noted that the trade payables at June 30th, 2014 included amounts accumulated to $418,000 and owed to the Cayman Islands government with respect to insurance coverage provided to the Foundation. The Auditor General stated that it was unlikely that the Foundation would be in a position to repay this without equity injection from the Cayman Islands government. It was his understanding that the Foundation was pursuing resolution with government as to the amounts to be paid and the amounts to be converted to equity. The Auditor General recommended the Foundation continue to pursue the Cayman Islands government to resolve the amounts that will be paid to the Risk Management Unit and the amounts that will be converted into equity. Also, the Foundation should establish a suitable mechanism going forward to ensure expenses do not accumulate again. The management of the Foundation responded that they will continue to pursue the matter until it has been resolved. The target date anticipated for resolving the matter is the end of the current financial year. Madam Speaker, I invite members of this Honourable House and the public to review this report in detail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Report of the Standing Business Committee, fourth meeting of the 2014-15 session of the Legislative Assembly. To be laid on the table of the Legislative Assembly by the Premier, the Honourable Minister of Affairs, Home Affairs, Health and Culture, Chairman of the Standing Business Committee.
Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the report of the Standing Business Committee of the Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands for the fourth meeting of the 2014-2015 session of the Legislative Assembly.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Premier wish to speak to this report as well?
No, Madam Speaker. Just for the information of those who may wonder what the Standing Business Committee is, the Standing Business Committee is the committee which sets the business of the House and allows the House to be able to have before it an order paper each day. So there really isn't anything in it that is worth my speaking to beyond that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
Questions to the honourable members and ministers of the Cabinet. I'm sorry. Statements by the honourable members and ministers of the Cabinet.
I have received notice for statements from the Honourable Premier and the Honourable Minister responsible for financial services, so we will receive the statements in that said order. Honourable Premier. The agenda I have on my desk, the next item is item 4. It says statements. Item 5 says questions.
Well, Madam, I know, but Madam Speaker, I think it's reversed on all the other papers, all the other orders, order paper. That's why I think the quizzical look is on everyone's face.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'm going to the one that I have on my desk and seeing that is not deviating from the traditional order of the order paper. We'll continue as follows, and I appreciate the member from Easton bringing it to the administrative staff attention. We'll continue with statements, Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wanted to speak this morning briefly to the issue of the positive impact of the reduction in the duty charge on diesel that Caribbean Utilities Company uses to generate electricity. Madam Speaker, many will recall that after the UDP government was elected in 2009, one of its first actions was to reimpose the 20 cents per gallon import duty on diesel fuel used by CUC for generation of electricity, which had been removed by the PPM administration in order to reduce the cost of electricity to consumers. Then less than a year later, the same government imposed another 25 cents per gallon to the cost of diesel fuel. So the actual cost to consumers went up by 45 cents under the UDP administration. At the time of the last increase in 2010, the now leader of the opposition was quoted in the press, in particular the Caymanian Compass, or Caymanian Compass as it was then known, of 23rd June 2010, as stating that the fuel duty hike put the burden of the increase only on those who could afford it. That is, he intimated, vehicle owners and Caribbean Utilities Company. He's reported to have also added that his government, quote, had to get that little bit of revenue and that 25 cents on fuel is not going to kill you, unquote. Madam Speaker, the answers of this House will show that my then progressive colleagues and myself, along with other opposition members, opposed this increase because we felt it was wrong. It was a bad time when the Great Recession was still biting for such an increase to be brought that would unavoidably hurt the broader economy. We knew that the now honourable leader of the opposition was wrong, and that it would not only be those who could afford it who would bear the burden, but it was ordinary Caymanians and residents who would, along with small businesses. And history has proved us right. Well, Madam Speaker, in January of this year, this government corrected this wrong by reducing the import duty charged on diesel brought in by Caribbean Utilities Company from 75 cents an imperial gallon to 50 cents. And in the past few months, the public has benefited from the decrease. And they will continue to benefit in months to come. The diesel import duty reduction has meant lower prices for electricity, which ought to equate to lower prices for goods and services in an effort to entice spending and help further bolster the economy. Both CUC and the Electricity Regulatory Authority report that residents have seen a reduction in their electricity bills, which reflects the government's import duty reduction. I know that members will be aware of this because I'm sure they have seen decreases in their own bills and would have also heard comments from the public. As some of us may be aware, there is an average 75-day lag between the time fuel is brought on island and the time that consumers will see the cost of this fuel reflected in their electricity bills. Additionally, any buildup of diesel fuel reserves will also impact this. As such, we understand that whilst consumers are seeing positive decreases in power bills, they will see the full benefit of the reduced duty rate on their May bills. Madam Speaker, for comparison, these islands saw a spike in the price of electricity in September 2014 with a retail rate of 35.07 cents per kilowatt hour for residential consumers. The price of electricity for May bills is projected to be between 25.63 cents per kilowatt hour for residential consumers, a 26.9% reduction since the September peak. Of this, 16.2% is attributable to this government's duty reduction. Next month, consumers should be able to compare their September 2014 electricity bills when the average household's electricity bill was approximately $350.70 to their May bill when the average household's CUC bill is projected to be about $256.30. Had there been no duty reduction, the average residential bill for May 2015 is projected at approximately $271.50. And whilst my focus has been on residential customers, it should be noted that business customers have also benefited. Madam Speaker, if you look at electricity consumption in October 2014, the fuel factor on customers' bills was at 24 cents per kilowatt hour. That figure is compared to 16 cents per kilowatt hour bill for March 2015 electricity consumption. The fuel factor mechanism that CUC uses ensures that the fuel charge is transparent and operates as a pass-through, with CUC charging customers the exact cost of fuel used to generate energy. This allows consumers to understand the fuel cost and ensures that they enjoy the full benefit of falling fuel prices as well as any import duty reduction. I would add, Madam Speaker, that it was in the much improved contract that the PPM government negotiated with CUC that ensured the level of transparency now available around the fuel factor that forms part of the overall CUC bill. I would also add that CUC informs me that it has received many positive comments from customers regarding the reduction in electricity bills. I must caution, though, Madam Speaker, that while the Progressives-led administration has found a way to reduce the import duty on diesel used by CUC, there has been no change in the base price of electricity that CUC charges, which accounts for 1/3 of power bills. It would be remiss of me not to remind consumers of electricity that there are measures they can take in their own homes and businesses to help further reduce the cost of power and therefore lower their bills from CUC. Simple things such as unplugging chargers for electronic devices when not in use, raising your air conditioning thermostat by 1 degree, unplugging your water heater when not in use, using energy-efficient appliances and other energy-saving measures can go a long way in reducing your power consumption and therefore your electricity bill. Madam Speaker, this government remains committed to easing the economic pressures on our people and businesses. As you know, Madam Speaker, we are in the throes of yet another budgeting season and continue to seek ways to bring about a conservative budget with no tax increases while continuing to reduce the cost of living the best we can for the people of these beloved islands. But, Madam Speaker, I am pleased on behalf of the government to bring this good news to the Legislative Assembly, and I will note in closing that this reduction in fuel is yet another progressive manifesto promise kept, along with one man, one vote, and a national minimum wage. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, under Standing Orders 30 and Suborder 2, I crave to ask the Premier, not the Minister responsible, nor he's the Minister of Finance, but anyway, he's speaking, and ask him to answer one or two questions.
Allowed.
Yes, that's a short question to the Premier, Madam Speaker. Can he say what is the savings per household as he's given here when he says that their May bill, when the average household CUC bill is projected to be about $256.30. Had there been no duty reduction, the average residential bill for May 2015 is projected at approximately $271.50. Can he tell me what this great amount of saving is? And if he do recall that my suggestion to them was the best thing they could have done was to take the $8 million they claim they're losing and, Madam Speaker, help those persons who have lost their electricity.
Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the figures there are the projected savings for the average household electricity bill. And by my simple arithmetic, it works out to $94.40 per household.
Madam
Honourable
Speaker,
Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, I'm looking at the 1, 2, 3, I guess fourth page, and in the 1, 2, 3, and fourth and fifth paragraphs, he said next month consumers should be able to compare the September 2014 electricity bills when the average household's electricity bill was approximately $350 to their May bill when the average household CUC bill is projected to be about $256. Had there been no duty reduction, the average residential bill for May 2015 is projected at approximately $271. So presumably because the government has given a reduction, the bill will not be $271. It will be $256. Correct?
If there are no further questions to the statement, we'll move on to the next statement. Honourable Minister for Financial Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wanted to make a statement this morning in connection with the modernization of Cayman's intellectual property regime. Madam Speaker, the global economy has developed in both complexity and sophistication over the past few decades, and accordingly, as a leading international financial center, Cayman's economy has grown in tandem. As a driver of this economic evolution, the innovation and creativity of modern technology is leading to new ways and new types of business. Just as significantly, it's transforming our personal lives. Yet, even as it permeates all aspects of our professional and personal endeavors, technology still continues to evolve as fresh ideas are conceived and brought into reality. Underpinning this constant sea change of activity and bringing logic and ethics to it is the protection of a person's right to benefit from their creativity. These rights relating to a person's intellectual property, are critical to encourage the application of technology in any economy. Madam Speaker, the protection of intellectual property is categorized in several key areas. Those are patents, copyrights, trademarks, design rights, and trade secrets. Basic protection in these areas is necessary for economic success. Advanced protection is critical to allow creativity in any economy to really flourish. It is with this understanding that the government has begun the process of modernizing the intellectual property protection regime in the Cayman Islands. Madam Speaker and honourable members of this House, this Legislative Assembly should be aware that on the 19th of March this year, at our request, the UK extended its 1988 Copyright Act to the Cayman Islands through the Copyright brackets Cayman Islands close brackets Order 2015 as passed by the Privy Council. This was the first major milestone in government's efforts. In order to extend the 1988 Copyright Act to Cayman, the extension of the UK's 1956 Copyright Act had to be revoked first. Both actions were accomplished through the new Copyright Cayman Islands Order 2015. Madam Speaker, as indicated in the order, I note that the extension of the 1988 Copyright Act is subject to changes requested by the Cayman Islands government. Although passed, the 2015 order that gives effect to the 1988 Copyright Act will not come into force in the Cayman Islands until a commencement date has been determined. It is anticipated that there will be at least a 6-month period before commencement to allow the Ministry of Commerce to conduct a public education campaign and to make necessary arrangements for local implementation. Madam Speaker, there are other initiatives underway to strengthen our intellectual property regime. The next major step is the introduction of a local register for trademarks. I expect to bring a new trademarks bill to this Honourable House in the next few months. Currently, registration of trademarks must first be done in the United Kingdom and then extended to the Cayman Islands. This introduces extra costs and steps to the registration process. There are also other costly requirements to use a trademark in the UK, which serves to prevent a challenge to the trademark. A local trademark registration system will make this protection more accessible to local individuals and companies. It will also allow the exclusion of specified words that can be protected in the United Kingdom, but which should not be restricted to any individual or company locally. For example, the word Cayman. Further to this, government is seeking to improve the ability of local trademark holders to extend these rights internationally through several international treaties and conventions. New trademarks legislation will require a repeal of the current patents and trademarks law. Because we are creating separate marks legislation, Madam Speaker, we subsequently will need to create a new separate law for patents. Other than a few small changes, this legislation essentially will include the same elements of the current patents law. The focus on the patent side is to allow access by local persons to the international patent system. This access, through what is known as the Patents Corporation Treaty, would allow entities in the Cayman Islands to apply for patent protection in more than 140 countries. Madam Speaker, my ministry has been and continues to work closely with the UK's Intellectual Property Office to take the necessary steps for our IP modernization. Their assistance during the first modernization phase has been invaluable, and we are very grateful for their ongoing support as we move into the second phase of our reform process. Madam Speaker, I already have alluded to the importance of IP protection and have provided an outline of three main areas of focus. Again, these being copyrights, trademarks, and patents. I would, however, take a few minutes to go into more detail on why this initiative is important. There are several notable benefits to modernizing copyright protection. First, there is a protection for locally created content. Our artists and musicians are world-class, and while this is recognized locally, there is a strong need for Cayman to meet international standards in order to ensure that the rights of our creative community can be recognized and protected abroad. Second, by modernizing Cayman's IP standards, our economy will become even more attractive to foreign investment in areas for which IP protection is important. We have an opportunity to see technology-based business flourish in Cayman, particularly through synergies with already established industries. Third, by recognizing IP rights of entities from other jurisdictions, there is a potential to broaden our local access to goods and services from other markets. There are other potential benefits, from government revenue to job creation to overall economic growth. But there's no denying the significance that a modern IP protection regime plays in a world that is driven by technology. Madam Speaker, before I close, I bring to this Honourable House's attention that while there are clear benefits to IP modernization, there are also several impacts to consider. The primary concern will be if businesses or individuals are infringing on the IP rights of others. If the holder of rights identifies that their rights are being infringed, they may decide to take legal action. This, at a minimum, could lead to the seizure of goods, but may also involve fines, penalties, or damages, depending on the extent of the infringing activity. It is these impacts that we seek to bring clarity to and manage with the education program mentioned earlier, to avoid misinformation creating mischief and undue concern. However, I must emphasize that intellectual property is an asset, one that is critical to many businesses for a variety of reasons. Infringing those rights, therefore, is akin to theft, whether intentional or otherwise. This is simply common sense and common decency. Logically and ethically, businesses and individuals should have the right to benefit from their works, as this will justify not only their creativity and innovation, but also the time, energy, and cost that goes into creating an IP asset. In closing, Madam Speaker, while we already have achieved a significant milestone in modernizing our IP protection regime, there is much left to be done. Nevertheless, with the support of the honourable members of this House, industry, and other key stakeholders, we will enhance this foundation for the long-term growth and the economic diversity and success of our islands. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I once again recognize the Honourable Minister for Financial Services to make his final statement for the day.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is a statement in connection with the commencement of parts of the National Conservation Law. Madam Speaker, in September last year, I informed the honourable members of this House that the implementation stage of the National Conservation Law 2013 had been formally initiated. Today, it is my pleasure to say that parts 3, 4, and 6, Section 50, and Schedules 1, 3, and 4 of the law will commence on Earth Day 2015, which is Wednesday, 22nd of April. Madam Speaker, it is so appropriate, so perfect for the Cayman Islands to celebrate Earth Day by providing an even greater legislative protection to our precious environment for the betterment and enjoyment of our residents and visitors. The National Conservation Law was passed on 13th December 2013, and the government continues to make steady progress on its full implementation. In September 2014, Parts 1 and 2 of the law, as well as Schedule 2, were commenced in order to provide the necessary definitions, key terms, phrases, and the administrative framework necessary for implementing the remaining parts of the National Conservation Law. Following this, the National Conservation Council was established, and based on the Council's recommendations, Cabinet has approved the commencements that will take place next Wednesday on Earth Day. Madam Speaker, Part 3 of the law addresses conservation of land. It sets out the processes by which Cabinet may designate areas of Crown land as protected areas, and the processes by which Cabinet may enter into agreements with willing landowners for private land to be designated as conservation areas. Part 4 addresses conservation of wildlife. It deals with the process of adding or removing species from the lists of protected species, as well as the measures to conserve and protect these species locally and internationally. And Part 6 of the law provides for the enforcement of the law, including the setting of penalties for offenses, as well as the compensations and other protections afforded to the public under the law. Madam Speaker, as I noted, Section 50 and Schedules 1, 3, and 4 will also commence on 22nd April. Section 50 empowers Cabinet to make regulations under law for various purposes. Schedule 1 lists those species of wildlife protected in the Cayman Islands. The wildlife are categorized as either Part 1 species or Part 2 species. Part 1 species are protected at all times, except for those exemptions provided for in Part 5 of the law, dealing with permits and licenses, or under the Marine Conservation Law regulations, for example, in relation to turtle licensing. Part 2 species are only protected if a conservation plan or regulations have been enacted. And the example is the queen conch, or conchs, as we typically refer to them. Madam Speaker, Schedule 3 outlines the content required in a management plan for a protected area. Lastly, Schedule 4 delineates and adopts the current animal sanctuaries as found in the revised Animals Law. Madam Speaker, the remaining parts of the law are Part 5, which deals with licenses and permits, and Part 7, which addresses general matters. The National Conservation Council is presently working on a commencement plan for these parts, with a view to recommend their implementation by the last quarter of 2015. In this event, the full National Conservation Law would be implemented. Madam Speaker, I am proud of the work that has been done over the years to develop and implement the National Conservation Law. I am grateful that Cayman can now point to a legislative framework that speaks to our love, protection, and appreciation of our environment. Lastly, Madam Speaker, in addition to Earth Day, Cayman is joining the world in celebrating April as Earth Month. We are doing so not to follow fashion, as we say, but because we know that what we have here on land and in the sea is beautiful, tremendously valuable, and yet fragile. I therefore ask everyone in the Cayman Islands to participate in our Earth Month and Earth Day observances and to continue being environmentally responsible year-round. Doing so will speak volumes about our love, protection, and appreciation of our environment and the respect that is due to our dear homeland. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize the member from Easton.
Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 32, I wonder if I could ask the Minister a few short questions.
Yes, certainly.
Madam Speaker, I wonder if the Minister can tell us if the regulations for the National Conservation Law has been gazetted.
Honourable Minister responsible for the environment.
Madam Speaker, there are regulations which exist currently under the Marine Conservation Law, and the National Conservation Law provides that once the relevant section is brought into effect, there is a savings provision which effectively continues those regulations under the National Conservation Law as if they had been adopted under that. The Section 50, which I have noted we are proposing to bring into effect next week with the other parts and schedules, provides for Cabinet to make additional regulations. The next step will be the drafting of regulations in relation to environmental impact assessments, and that has been authorized and is ongoing at present. Thank you.
Member from Easton.
Madam Speaker, as I recall, when we did this in December 2013, the government promised that the reason they didn't have the regulations was because they were going to use the conservation law, which was being repealed. We're going to use those regulations until government could get to it, and it was due shortly. We are a year and more past. Can the minister give us a definitive time when the regulations, other than the marine conservation regulations, will be in place to affect this law?
Honourable Minister for the Environment.
Madam Speaker, if I'm understanding the member's question correctly, it seems to me that perhaps there is an overlap between his perspective in relation to the regulations that we indicated would continue under the National Conservation Law, which originally were established under the Marine Conservation Law, and the separate regulations, which could be a number of areas. The one specific area that has been authorized and is being worked on in terms of the drafting at this point relates to the environmental impact assessments. Those regulations are relevant to sections 41 and 42 and 43 of the National Conservation Law. Those particular sections fall under Part 7 of the law, which is a part that will be brought into effect subsequently. The National Conservation Council has been working very hard on agreeing the process and deciding on exactly how the environmental impact assessment regulations would work. So they've worked out a flow chart, they've worked out all the criteria that will apply, they've worked out the circumstances within which these criteria would be applied. And those regulations are the regulations that are currently being drafted after the extensive work that the National Conservation Council has done to work out the process and the details in respect to that. I hope that answers the member's question.
Honourable Member from Easton.
Madam Speaker, I am by no stretch of the imagination and a lawyer, worse, a drafting one. But my understanding of a law is that the operations of that law is put in regulation, secondary legislation. This law was put in place, the National Conservation Law, with different sections going in, being enforceable, put in place at different times, coming into force at different times. How are we operating the parts that have already been put in place? Is it under the Marine Conservation Law regulations?
Honourable Minister responsible for the Environment.
Madam Speaker, I suppose I could start just generally by saying that the primary legislation will sometimes authorize, in general, will authorize regulations to be adopted by Cabinet where they're appropriate, where they're necessary, where they're specified by the primary legislation. In this case, the regulations that are required for the various parts that have been adopted have been authorized or are being, sorry, for the parts that have been adopted, no regulations currently are required. We are proposing to adopt or commence specifically Section 50, which is the section of the law which authorizes Cabinet to create regulations generally in relation to any particular area of the law that may at any point in time appear necessary to assist the interpretation and application and enforcement of the law and its various provisions. But we are certainly at this point adopting Section 50 as of next week to allow Cabinet the power to create those regulations, and the first set of regulations that are being considered specifically under this law will be the environmental impact assessment regulations. The existing regulations in relation to marine parks have existed previously under the Marine Conservation Law. Those regulations will continue to exist under the National Conservation Law unless and until they have been repealed and replaced by the action of this Cabinet under, or a future Cabinet under, the National Conservation Law.
I'll allow this final question.
Madam
Short
Speaker,
question.
thank you. As I recall, when we moved the motion and it was adopted here, I moved the motion on spare guns and parts. That was under Section 20 something, which would be in Part 1 of it. Is that Part 5? That's Part 5? But, Madam Speaker, I want, if such is the case, and Part 5 is only now coming into being, Madam Speaker, I wonder, I don't know if the law says fifth, it says that it's only for that section, Part 5 or 7, that Cabinet can make regulations. Because why are we enforcing the regulations of the Marine Conservation Law that requires us, or forget require us, but the Marine Regulation Law is governing spare guns. And here we are still utilizing that, but we don't put the section in there or amend those regulations to allow spare guns to be used and licensed and parts to be brought in. Why don't we amend that since the law makes provision for it? This Honorable House approved that.
Honourable Minister responsible for the environment.
Madam Speaker, thank you. In relation to the question from the member, the regulations, well, let me step back. Part 5, as I mentioned, and Part 7 of the law are proposed to be brought into effect later this year. The National Conservation Council, having been involved heavily with the issue of the environmental impact assessment regulations and the process, remembering that the National Conservation Council has representation, broad representation, including the districts, including various significant government departments and entities which might have an interest in the process. They have spent a great deal of time working on that. On their recommendation, we are now moving forward with the commencement as I have outlined. They are now, at this point, moving to deal with licensing and permits and the issues around that, because there are complexities in relation to that they would like to ensure that reflects fairness and consistency. So having Section 50 in place, which authorizes Cabinet to create regulations, when we get to later on in the year commencing parts 5 and 7 of the law, which Part 5 deals with the licensing and permits that the members referring to, the council would then be in a position, having prepared the necessary recommendations and outlined the process, to refer to Cabinet for the authorization of any changes to regulations to reflect the law that may be appropriate. So I can't really add anything more than that to the question from the member, Madam Speaker.
Madam Clerk, we're moving on to the next item of business.
Questions to honorable members and ministers of the Cabinet. The elected member for East End to ask the Premier, the Honorable Minister of Home Affairs, Health and Culture, number 20.
We have passed the hour of 11 a.m. Is there a motion to suspend Standing Order 23, 7 and 8? Honorable Premier.
Madam Speaker, I move the suspension of Standing Order 23, 7 and 8 in order that questions may be taken beyond the hour of 10 o'clock.
The question is that Standing Order...
11 o'clock, sorry.
The question is that Standing Order 23, 7 and 8 be suspended to allow question time to go beyond the hour of 11 a.m. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Accordingly, Standing Order 23, 7 and 8 is hereby suspended. I recognize the member from East End for question number 20.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, question 20, standing in my name, asks, can the Honourable Minister say when the Electoral Boundary Commission will be appointed in accordance with the government motion number 1/2014-2015?
Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I think the member will be aware, the question has been overtaken by events, and the Electoral Boundary Commission was appointed some time ago. But I've spoken to him privately, and what I will do for his benefit and for that of the House is that tomorrow I will provide an update with respect to the Electoral Boundary Commission's work, and which I think would be helpful to not just the member, but more broadly to the members, all members of the House and the broader public.
Just for the record, then, is the member seeking to withdraw the question? Are you satisfied with that answer? Are we asking for deferral of the response?
Madam Speaker, I'm asking that the question be deferred. I'll provide the update in the form of a response to the question.
Okay, that's what I thought. So can we then have a suspension of 23? Sorry, just 1 minute. Can we have a motion in accordance of 23.5, where a member of government with the leave of the House may defer answering a question and put it for another day? Honourable Premier, 23.5.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I move. Is it a suspension of that standing order? No, it's a motion brought under that standing order. Yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. In accordance with Standing Order 23.5, I move that the question on the order paper, standing in the name of the member from East End, be deferred until tomorrow
The question is that in accordance with Standing Order 23.5, that question number 20, as it appears on today's order paper, be hereby deferred until tomorrow morning. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Accordingly, the question is hereby deferred until tomorrow morning. Are members minded to take luncheon break now, or should we go through the first reading? Madam Clerk, we'll go through with the first readings.
Government business, bills, first reading. The Proceeds of Crime Amendment Bill 2015.
The bill has been deemed to have been read the first time and is set down for a second reading.
The International Interest in Mobile Equipment Cape Town Convention Bill 2015.
The bill has been deemed to have been read the first time and is now set down for its second reading.
The Bill of Sale Amendment Bill 2015.
The bill has been deemed to have been read the first time and is now set down for its second reading.
The Civil Aviation Authority Amendment Bill 2015.
The bill has been deemed to have been read the first time and is now set down for its second reading.
The Directors' Registration and Licensing Amendment Bill 2015.
The bill has been deemed to have been read the first time and is also set down for its second reading.
The Immigration Amendment Bill 2015.
The bill has been deemed to have been read the first time, is set down for its second reading.
Coroner's Amendment Bill 2015.
This bill has also been deemed to have been read the first time and is set down for its second reading. The House will now suspend for its luncheon break. We'll reconvene at 2:30 p.m.